The heat from the industrial dishwasher rolled up into Jalen's face like the sticky breath of an Atlanta summer morning. But he didn't flinch. Just shy of 6 a.m., while most of the city was still tucked under blankets and the streets lay silent in the dim blue of dawn, Jalen Martinez had already been working for 3 straight hours in the back kitchen of Harvest and Hearth, a place where he wasn't just the dishwasher, he was the quiet heartbeat behind every polished plate and spotless pan, the rhythm that helped the whole restaurant stay afloat. His calloused hands moved with the silent precision of a dancer lost in his own music. Scrape, rinse, load, repeat. The pattern was so familiar, so ingrained in his body that it had become almost meditative, a kind of moving prayer, if you could ignore the chaos exploding just beyond the swinging kitchen doors. Out there, the restaurant was still growling like a beast barely caged. "Where's table 6? That salmon should have gone out 5 minutes ago." Chef Rodriguez's voice sliced through the kitchen like a cleaver through bone. The dinner rush had long since died down, but the aftermath lingered thick in the air like smoke that refused to clear. Jalen swiped the sweat from his forehead with the inside of his sleeve, careful not to dirty the gloves covering his worn hands. He was only 28, but he'd already spent nearly half his life behind sinks, washing dishes in greasy diners and upscale bistros since he was 16. To most, it was the kind of job you did when you had no other options. But for Jalen, this was duty. It was quiet dignity. It was the unseen work that allowed everyone else to shine. Every plate that passed through his station was cleaned with surgical care, like it mattered, because to him it did. He didn't believe that pride only belonged to those in pressed shirts flashing fake smiles at tables. It lived here, too, in the heat, the steam, the back sweat, the quiet corners where no one said thank you, but where everything still had to get done. A faint vibration against his hip stopped his rhythm. Jalen pulled out his phone with one damp hand. A message from Marcus. "Got my finance exam tomorrow. Wish me luck, big bro." Jalen smiled, tired but proud. He typed back with wet fingers. "You've got this. Just remember what I said about derivatives." Marcus, 22, was in his final year of an accounting degree at a local community college. Books were expensive, tuition even more so, even at a public school. Every extra shift Jalen picked up, every late night he stayed scrubbing pots until his back gave out. It all went toward paving a road for Marcus, a road their parents never got to see. They'd died in a car crash when Marcus was just 14. Since then, it had been just the two of them, surviving in a tiny one-bedroom apartment in East Atlanta. Jalen had never gotten to choose a future of his own. Instead, he chose to become the foundation for his brothers. Marcus was the only family he had left, and Jalen had decided a long time ago that was enough. Out in the dining room, now dim and mostly empty, a man in his 50s wearing the standard black polo and khakis moved methodically from table to table. Jalen squinted through the steam. Walter. Something. He couldn't remember the last name. The guy had started a little under 3 weeks ago, working night shifts as a busser. Never said much beyond good evening and have a good night. Quiet, almost invisible. But something about Walter felt odd. Most new bussers were all nervous energy, rushing through table resets, wiping down surfaces with big, fast, clumsy strokes, desperate to prove themselves. Walter was the opposite. He cleaned with the patience of a craftsman. Every movement precise, deliberate. He treated each table like it was sacred, as if he were prepping it for surgery, not a second-round seating. His polo was always immaculate, not a single wrinkle. His khakis looked like they'd been pressed with a ruler, and his boots, black leather, mirror-shined, too polished for someone spending his nights scraping sticky sauce off table edges and stacking half-empty bread baskets. It didn't make sense. If busser. He's weird, right? Micah appeared beside Jalen's sink, balancing a tray of wine glasses with the ease of a magician. At 24, tall, lanky, and always smiling, Micah had a way of making every diner feel like they'd walked into a friend's home rather than a restaurant. He'd been with Harvest and Hearth for about 8 months and had a rare gift, emotional intelligence. He could read a room like a script. "Walter," Jalen glanced toward the dining room again. "Seems harmless enough." "I'm not saying he's dangerous," Micah said, lowering his voice and setting the tray down carefully. "But have you noticed how he watches everything? I mean really watches. It's like he's not working. He's studying." Micah leaned in. "Like he's planning to buy this place?" Jalen didn't laugh, because he'd noticed it too. Walter always lingered a little longer than necessary, his eyes sharp and calculating. He wasn't just doing his job. He was watching the kitchen line during peak hours, clocking which servers froze up under pressure, noting how the hostess handled the reservation log when the place got slammed. Not creepy, just intense, too intentional. "Maybe he's just detail-oriented," Jalen offered, but even he didn't buy it. "Or maybe," Micah whispered, glancing over his shoulder, "he's corporate. You know, one of those secret evaluators they send to sniff out weak spots before renewing a franchise agreement." Jalen's stomach clenched. With the surprise health inspection looming the next morning, the last thing they needed was a corporate spy lurking in plain sight. But Walter didn't fit the typical mold of a corporate auditor. Those guys were usually low-profile, half-disguised in sloppy uniforms and distracted mannerisms trying to blend in. Walter stood out. Not because he was flashy, but because he was too competent for the job. No one wiped down tables like they were restoring antiques. Unless they had a reason. "Hey, you two." Jeff Rodriguez's bark shattered the speculation. "Less talking, more scrubbing. That prep station's not going to clean itself." Jalen and Micah exchanged a look. Half smirk, half sigh. Then got back to work. The hours ahead would be long and brutal. But they were used to that. What Jalen wasn't used to, and what he couldn't shake, was the sense that something was shifting inside this place. In just the past month, 3 servers had quit, all citing management issues and unclear expectations. The hostess had been written up twice for seating errors that weren't even her fault, and Sandra, the normally unshakable night manager, had started snapping at people over the smallest things. Something was changing at Harvest and Hearth. And Jalen, who had built a life learning to read the unspoken tensions of every kitchen he'd worked in, knew better than to ignore his instincts. As Jalen loaded yet another rack of plates into the industrial washer, his eyes caught something in the reflective surface of the stainless steel wall. A figure, perfectly still. It was Walter, standing in the middle of the empty dining room, his cleaning rag hanging limp in one hand, his gaze cutting straight through the kitchen past like he was seeing something far beyond it. There was a stillness to him, not of fatigue, but of control, like someone deep in thought, not lost in it. And then, just for a second, their eyes met. Not directly, but in the warped reflection. Walter smiled. But it wasn't that customer service smile that restaurant workers wore like armor. No, this one was real, quiet, almost like he was saying, "I see you." Then the moment passed. Walter looked down and returned to wiping the table like it had never happened. Jalen blinked, shook his head, and pulled himself back into the moment. Whoever Walter was, that could wait. Right now there were dishes to finish, surfaces to sanitize, and rent to make. His brother's tuition didn't care for mystery. And yet, as the night crept forward and the restaurant emptied to nothing but echoes and the buzz of fluorescent lights, a quiet thought took hold in Jalen's mind and refused to let go. Walter wasn't here just to clean tables. There was an intent to his every step, a calm assurance in how he moved. like someone who already knew exactly who he was and exactly why he was here. Tomorrow's health inspection might determine the restaurant's fate. But tonight was already shaping his. Micah's voice echoed faintly from the cramped employee break room, tinged with the desperation he could no longer hide. But I've always paid on time. Back in March, I was short, but I made it up, didn't I? And last summer, when my car broke down, I still got you the rent. Just a week late, that's all. Jalen entered quietly, moving like a shadow. He slipped into the farthest chair from Micah and pulled out his phone, pretending to scroll, not wanting to intrude, but unable to ignore. Every word Micah spoke felt like a ghost of Jalen's own past, dragging him back to nights he'd tried so hard to forget. Nights where a few dollars meant the difference between shelter and sleeping in the back of a car with the windows fogged up from breath. Tomorrow? No, sir. I can't have it all by tomorrow. The eviction notice said Friday. Please. I'll call my sister. Or Min. I just need a little more. Click. The line went dead. Micah stared at the screen, as if willing it to come back to life. Then, slowly, he turned it over on the table, screen down. His hands were trembling. Landlord? Jalen asked quietly without lifting his eyes. Micah nodded once, sharply, like admitting it hurt more than words could. He wiped his face with the back of his hand, catching tears before they fell too far. Sorry, I didn't know anyone was in here. Don't apologize, Jalen said, setting his phone down. How much are you short? Micah hesitated. His voice dropped low, almost like a confession. 800. Jalen let out a slow breath through his nose. 800. That was more than 2 weeks of dishwasher pay, even with overtime. It might as well have been 8 grand. I had it, Micah added, voice cracking. I swear I had it. But my mom, she's sick. The meds are expensive. I've been sending money home, and this month the tips have been trash, especially after those 3 servers quit. We've all been stretched too thin. Jalen nodded slowly, running the math in his head, even though he knew the numbers wouldn't work. It was the same math he'd been running since he was 16. Rent, groceries, utility bills. Hope. What about your sister? She's got 3 kids. Her husband just lost his job, Micah said, half laughing in that way you do when you're trying not to fall apart. I'm the one who's supposed to be helping them, not the other way around. The silence that followed was the heavy kind, the kind that knows you've hit a wall. The only sound was the low hum of the ancient refrigerator in the corner, rattling like it, too, was exhausted. Jalen thought about Marcus, about the nights he'd lain awake calculating to the cent what they could afford and what they'd have to go without. Somehow they'd made it work. But it was never easy, and Micah was standing on that same fragile edge right now. Jalen spoke carefully. What if we stayed tonight? I mean, really stayed. Got this place so clean it shines like a hospital. Micah frowned. Sandra's already making us stay late. That won't change my rent. I'm not talking about just staying. I'm talking about going above and beyond. Make this place sparkle so much that Sandra has to take notice. Maybe she throws us a bonus. Maybe she puts in a word upstairs. Maybe it leads to something better. They both knew it was a long shot. Bonuses at Harvest and Hearth were about as rare as snow in July. But Jalen had seen how stressed Sandra was. Really seen it, and desperation has a way of making people generous when you least expect it. Besides, Jalen continued, we're here anyway. Why not make it count? I could help you polish the silverware, deep clean the hood vents, all that stuff that takes forever, alone. Micah looked at him, eyes wet. Jalen, I can't ask you to do that. You're not asking, I'm offering, Jalen said, standing up and stretching his aching back. We look out for each other, right? That's what makes this place different from all those soulless chain restaurants, where no one even knows your name. Micah's face tightened again, but this time, it wasn't fear. It was gratitude. And just a flicker of hope. "You're serious? We'll probably be here till 3 or 4 a.m. "I've pulled all-nighters before," Jalen said with a grin. "Besides, Marcus is cramming for his calc exam. He'll be up too, so it's not like I'm missing out on anything." Micah let out a shaky laugh. "You're nuts, you know that?" "Yeah," Jalen said, moving toward the door. "Nuts enough to believe we can turn this into something better." What they didn't know was that just outside the break room door, someone had been listening the entire time, silent and still. It was just after 12:30 a.m. The restaurant had emptied out completely, except for 3 people, Jalen, Micah, and Walter. Sandra had left after triple-checking the prep stations, leaving a final list of critical tasks taped to her office door. The last server had clocked out 20 minutes earlier, muttering about corporate nonsense on their way out. But Jalen and Micah remained. So did Walter, still cleaning, still quiet, still doing a job no one asked him to. "You don't have to stay," Micah had said earlier when he noticed Walter still wiping down table legs. "I don't mind," Walter had replied, eyes focused on the cloth in his hand. "If you start something, you should finish it." Now Jalen was attacking the walk-in cooler with industrial cleaner, scrubbing deep into the grout lines on the floor. Micah was reorganizing the spice rack alphabetically, double-checking expiration dates on the bottles. Walter moved silently between them, always seeming to be exactly where he was needed. "Like a ghost that cleans?" "How much longer, you think?" Micah asked, elbow deep in condiments. "Depends on how clean we want it," Jalen replied, scrubbing harder. "If the inspector's picky, they'll check under the fridge, behind the fryer, maybe even the ceiling tiles." Micah nodded toward the dining room, where Walter was now polishing the legs of every chair. "That guy's a cleaning machine." Jalen paused to watch. Walter had removed every chair from a table, wiped each leg individually, cleaned the base of the table, and now was tilting his head to examine the surface under shifting light, checking for smudges. "Walter, you don't have to go that far," Jalen called. Walter didn't look up. "If you're going to do something, do it right the first time." There was something in the tone, quiet, calm, but heavy with authority, that made both younger men exchange glances. That wasn't just someone being helpful. That was someone used to being in charge. "So, Walter," Micah ventured, trying for casual, "what did you do before this? You seem pretty experienced." Walter paused. Just a beat, just enough for someone paying attention to notice. "Various things," he said, "mostly hospitality." Vague, intentional, it was clear. Don't push. As the night wore on, the 3 men, who had started the evening as strangers, moved in a strange rhythm, like a well-oiled machine that had been running for years. Jalen took the heavy-duty tasks, degreasing, floor scrubbing, deep organizing the walk-in. Micah handled the finesse, inventory, polishing, double-wiping surfaces. Walter drifted between them, appearing exactly where he was needed. Around 2 a.m., Jalen was sorting produce for the 3rd time when Walter stepped into the cooler doorway. "Can I ask you something?" His voice was low, reflective. "Sure," Jalen said, not looking up. "Why are you doing this? Staying late? Working yourself raw for a place that probably doesn't pay you nearly enough?" Jalen stopped moving. That was the first truly honest question Walter had asked all night. He stood up, wiped sweat from his brow. "Because someone has to care," he said. "Sandra's stressed out. Micah's about to lose his place. If we fail tomorrow, everyone suffers. I can't fix everything, but I can make sure this cooler's so clean the inspector wants to eat lunch in here." Walter nodded slowly. "You're not even that close to Micah, are you?" "No, but I know enough," Jalen said. "I know he sends money home to help his mom. I know he's been pulling double shifts without complaining. I know he stays late to help new servers learn the system, even when no one thanks him for it." Walter said nothing. Sometimes silence speaks the loudest. Micah looked stunned as he stared at the check in his hands. The number on it, $1,500, 0 cents. It didn't look real. It was more than just ink on paper. It was relief. It was hope. It was the space to breathe. "That's your rent," Walter explained gently, "plus a signing bonus. Consider it an investment in your future and in ours." The courtyard around them was still and quiet, tucked between two buildings like a secret no one else knew. In the distance, the sounds of Atlanta morning traffic began to hum, but for the three men standing there, time felt suspended. Jalen looked down at the business card again, the gold lettering catching the sunlight. Walter Fairchild, founder and CEO. He had to remind himself to breathe. Everything suddenly made sense. Walter's precision, his calm authority, the way he saw everything and said almost nothing, the way he watched people when they thought no one was watching them. "Wait," Jalen finally asked, voice low, barely trusting this wasn't a dream. "What exactly are you offering us?" Walter turned to face them both. His smile was warm but steady, the kind of smile that meant business. "I'm offering you the chance to build something with me. Not just work a job, not just survive shift to shift." He looked at Micah, whose knees had nearly buckled from the weight of the moment. "For you. Front of house coordinator. You'd lead the service team, manage customer relations, help train new staff. Starting salary, $48,000, 0 cents. Full benefits, health insurance, PTO, tuition assistance." Micah opened his mouth, then closed it. "I've never managed anyone. I mess up orders. I drop a tray just last week." Walter chuckled, shaking his head. "I'm not hiring perfection, Micah. I'm hiring potential. I've watched you handle demanding customers without losing your cool. I've seen how other servers come to you for advice, how you train the new ones without anyone even asking you to." He pulled out his phone and read off notes. "Table 12 wants no ice, extra lemon. Table 7's husband has a shellfish allergy. You make sure the kitchen preps his dish on a clean board every time. The elderly couple on Tuesdays, you remember her soup needs to be piping hot and that he can't cut steak well because of arthritis, so you ask the kitchen to slice it." Micah stared. "You noticed all that?" "A good manager notices everything," Walter said. "And you've been doing that, just without the title." Jalen's heart was pounding. "And you?" Walter said, turning to him. "Kitchen operations lead, starting at $55,000, 0 cents a year. Performance bonuses, profit sharing, same benefits package." Jalen blinked. 55,000? It was more than double what he made now scrubbing dishes. It was more than he had ever dreamed of making. It was freedom. From the constant weight of barely making ends meet, it was a bigger apartment. It was Marcus's tuition, without the crushing guilt of having to work every weekend to make rent. It was air. Walter gave him a knowing look. "I imagine the tuition assistance might be useful for someone putting a younger brother through college." Jalen felt a tightness in his chest, like everything he'd held in for years was suddenly right at the surface. "And there's one more thing," Walter said, voice growing serious. "This only works if you both say yes. I saw something last night that money can't buy. People who genuinely care about each other. Who step up, not for a paycheck, but because it's the right thing to do." He paused, letting the words settle. "I can train you in scheduling, inventory, cost control, but I can't train integrity. I can't teach loyalty." Micah wiped his eyes quickly and nodded. Jalen just stood there, stunned, trying to process the shift that had just happened in his life. "You don't have to say yes right now," Walter said, pulling 2 heavy envelopes from his jacket. "Take these home. Read them. Talk it over with your families. I want you to be sure." Jalen accepted the envelope with trembling hands. The paper felt thick and expensive, embossed with the gold seal of Fairchild Restaurant Group. It didn't just feel like a contract. It felt like a key. Micah still couldn't quite wrap his mind around it. "Why us?" he asked, voice shaking. "You could hire people with degrees, real managers. Why take a chance on 2 guys like us?" Walter gave the kind of smile that starts in the heart and makes it all the way to the eyes. Because people with degrees don't stay past midnight polishing baseboards. They don't stay 4 hours after close just to help someone who's drowning. They don't care enough to make the difference between passing an inspection and acing one. He extended his hand. "I'm not hiring employees," he said. "I'm choosing partners." Jalen took that hand, and with it he took the first step into a new life, a life where he wasn't just trying to survive, a life where he was building something that mattered. As Walter turned and left, Micah looked down at the check again, then up at Jalen. Feeling of improvement. "Are we really doing this?" Jalen's voice was quiet but sure. "We already did." And somewhere, back in the kitchen they had scrubbed until dawn, the industrial dishwasher hummed, not as a reminder of the job they had, but as a symbol of how far they'd come. This was no longer just about surviving. It was about becoming. "Rent," Walter explained calmly, "plus a signing bonus. Think of it as an investment, one in your future and in ours." Jalen couldn't speak. The city, the rumble of morning traffic, the noise of jackhammers, horns, life itself, all of it faded into white noise, as if the world had suddenly paused to let this moment settle in. He finally found his voice, low and unsteady. "What exactly are you offering?" Walter smiled again, but this time it wasn't the polite, measured smile of a boss. This was the kind of smile that only came from someone who knew he was offering something life-changing. "A chance to build something," Walter said simply. "Together. Someone who can pass down not just procedures, but pride." Jalen's heart stopped for a second. He'd spent his life in the background, in steam-filled kitchens and behind stacks of greasy dishes. No one had ever spoken of his work with that kind of reverence before. Walter continued, voice steady. "Kitchen operations lead, starting salary $55,000, 0 cents a year plus performance bonuses and profit sharing, full benefits, health insurance, paid leave, tuition assistance." He paused, just for a breath, and then said with a small, knowing smile, "I imagine that last part might come in handy for someone covering their brother's college tuition." The words hit Jalen like a freight train. $55,000. 0 cents. That wasn't just money, it was freedom. Freedom from their cramped one-bedroom apartment. Freedom from working double shifts every weekend. Freedom from choosing between gas money and groceries. It was the first time in years Jalen felt like he could breathe. Walter turned to Micah. "As for you, front of house coordinator. You'd oversee the service team, manage guest relations, create shift schedules, and lead training. Starting at $48,000, 0 cents. Micah nearly collapsed. His legs wobbled, and he instinctively reached for Jalen's arm to steady himself. 48? He repeated, stunned. I don't have management experience." Walter smiled again, soft but resolute. "You have something more valuable. The respect of your peers. I've seen the servers come to you when they're unsure. I've watched you deal with difficult customers with patience and poise. You know your regulars' preferences by heart, not because someone told you to, but because you pay attention." He pulled out his phone, opened his notes app, and began to read. "Table 12 always asks for lemon wedges and no ice. Table 7's husband has a shellfish allergy. You always remind the kitchen to prep his food separately. The elderly couple who comes in every Tuesday, she likes her soup extra hot. He needs his steak cut into small bites because of arthritis. Micah stared at him, speechless. You noticed all that? He whispered. A good manager notices everything, Walter replied. And you've already been managing relationships. You just didn't realize it. Jalen felt like he was floating. Kitchen operations lead. It sounded like something you'd see on a crisp business card, not attached to a dishwasher. But more than the title, it was what it represented. Recognition. It was acknowledgement that the invisible work he'd poured himself into for years actually meant something. Then Walter's tone changed, calmer, more serious. There's one condition, he said. Jalen and Micah looked up. I want both of you, or neither. What I saw last night, the sacrifice, the commitment, the care you had for one another, that's a foundation I want to build this new location on. Walter's voice was quiet but firm. I can teach inventory systems, cost analysis, staff scheduling, but I can't teach someone to care. You two already do. By now the sunlight was stretching across downtown Atlanta, catching the glass of office towers, washing the sidewalks in gold. People hurried by with phones pressed to their ears, coffee in hand, none of them knowing that, in a tucked-away courtyard, 2 lives were being rewritten. When would we start? Jalen asked, almost afraid the answer might vanish if he blinked. 2 weeks, Walter said. I need to finalize the lease and get equipment ordered. You'll finish your current roles next week, then spend a week training at our Buckhead flagship before opening the new location. He reached into his jacket again and handed each of them a thick envelope. Employment contracts. Take them home, read them carefully, talk it over with your families. This is a big decision. I want you to be sure. Jalen took the envelope with trembling hands. The paper was heavy, professional. At the top, in bold letters, was embossed, Baychild Restaurant Group. Micah, still processing, asked the only question he could form. Il self-huelas. Walter's answer came not as a pitch, but as a truth he'd carried for years. Because the people with degrees and experience, they don't stay until 4:00 a.m. to help a coworker they barely know. They don't reorganize a walk-in cooler 3 times to make sure it's perfect. They don't turn a health inspection into a victory. He extended a hand to both of them. I'm not hiring employees, I'm choosing partners. As Jalen shook that hand, something shifted inside him. For the first time in his adult life, the future didn't just look like surviving until next month. It looked like possibility. 3 weeks later, the new Harvest and Hearth peach tree buzzed with the quiet chaos of a soft opening. Guests filled the dining room, food bloggers, small business owners, longtime customers from the original location. Everyone invited was hand-picked, because tonight wasn't just about food. It was about story. Jalen stood in the kitchen doorway, crisp white chef's coat, freshly pressed. On the left chest, embroidered in elegant navy thread, Kitchen Operations Lead Jalen Martinez. It still didn't feel real. Just 3 weeks ago he was up to his elbows in grease and gray water. Now he was managing 12 kitchen staff, overseeing plating, coordinating timing, checking every dish before it hit the pass. Table 7, shouted Marcus Rodriguez, the nephew of Chef Rodriguez and a rising star Walter had recruited. 2 lamb shanks, 1 salmon, 1 vegetarian pasta. Jalen moved like clockwork, checking temperatures with an infrared thermometer, inspecting every plate, sauce drizzled with precision, garnishes perfectly angled, no smudges on the rim. This wasn't cleanup. This was craftsmanship. Through the pass, he could see Micah gliding through the dining room with an easy confidence. His new uniform, a tailored vest, clean white shirt, deep navy tie, gave him the air of someone who didn't just work here. But how's the kitchen? Micah asked, peeking in. Smooth, Jalen replied. Table 12 asked for a dairy-free version of the salmon. Already subbed the butter sauce for lemon herb oil. Micah smiled. 3 weeks ago, that kind of decision would have taken 3 approvals. Jalen nodded toward the corner booth, where Walter sat with 3 investors in tailored suits. They look impressed, he said. Micah grinned. One of them said something about authentic hospitality and a sustainable growth model. I just nodded and poured more wine. And then, like some perfect cue, Walter appeared in the doorway, this time in a dark charcoal suit, looking more like the CEO he was than the quiet busser they once knew. How are my partners doing? He asked. Micah and Jalen both stood taller. Jalen reported, 96 covers, average ticket time 7 minutes under goal, no major issues, 1 allergy accommodation handled smoothly. Guest satisfaction's at 4.7 out of 5, Micah added. Only complaint was about the music being too loud. We turned it down. Walter nodded with approval. The investors are very interested. We're talking expansion. Birmingham, Nashville. The words hung in the air like a promise. There's more, Walter added, pulling out his phone. Atlanta Business Journal wants to run a feature. He turned the screen toward them. The email subject read, From dishwasher to kitchen, lead a new model for restaurant success. Jalen felt his face flush. It wasn't about fame. It was about being seen. Finally. They want to interview you both. The story isn't just about food, Walter said. It's about character, about what happens when you treat your people like partners instead of parts. Jalen turned and looked out the back kitchen door. He could just see the parking lot, and imagined Marcus walking toward him, backpack slung over one shoulder, textbooks under his arm. Marcus had just been accepted into a 4-year accounting program at Georgia State, and for the first time Jalen wouldn't have to choose between keeping the lights on and paying tuition. Walter followed his gaze, then said quietly, 6 months from now we open in Nashville. I'll need someone to help lead it. Then he looked back at Jalen and smiled. Think your brother might want to learn the restaurant business from the ground up. Jalen felt the heat rise in his cheeks. Do they want to interview me? He asked, stunned. And both of you, Walter added with a small smile. They're not interested in degrees or credentials. They want to tell a story about character, about loyalty, about what happens when you treat employees like partners, and what kind of community that can build. Through the back kitchen door, Jalen could see the small lot behind the restaurant, the spot where Marcus probably just finished his shift at the kitchen. His little brother had been accepted into a 4-year program at Georgia State University. For the first time, Jalen didn't have to choose between paying tuition and putting dinner on the table. Walter's voice turned quiet, almost nostalgic. You know what the best part is? He said, eyes scanning the horizon like he could already see it. In 6 months, when we open in Nashville. He paused, turning fully to face Jalen. I'm going to need an assistant director of operations. Jalen blinked. The words didn't land all at once. Walter continued, his voice now serious, measured. Someone who understands the culture we're building. Someone who can train new staff not just in our standards, but in our spirit. Someone who knows that what we're doing here matters. He looked directly at Jalen, no longer as a boss evaluating an employee, but as a mentor, placing his trust in someone's hands. Think your brother might want to learn the restaurant business from the ground up? I hear he's good with numbers. Jalen's throat tightened. It wasn't just the offer. It was what the offer meant. Walter wasn't just giving him a career. He was offering his family a future. In that single moment, Jalen saw it all. Marcus with a clipboard in hand, learning back-of-house operations, laughing with servers, asking smart questions, finding his own path, not as a burden Jalen had to carry, but as a partner in building something bigger than either of them. The kitchen timer beeped in the background, pulling them back to the present. There were still dishes to plate, guests to serve, but something fundamental had shifted. Jalen turned toward his prep station. Mike had disappeared through the doors, back into the dining room. But this time, both of them carried something new. Not just responsibility, not just pride, but purpose. The unshakable feeling that this was only the beginning of a journey much larger than themselves. From the far side of the dining room, in the same corner booth where he always sat, Walter lifted his wine glass toward the kitchen. Through the pass window, his eyes met Jalen's. It was a silent toast, but the message was loud and unmistakable. To second chances. To seeing potential where others only see problems. And to a lasting truth. That the best businesses are never built on profit margins alone. And people who are willing to take care of one another. In the weeks that followed, food critics wrote glowing reviews of the new Peachtree location, praising its immaculate attention to detail and rare warmth of service. Business analysts began studying Walter Fairchild's employee development model as a case study in sustainable growth. But for Jalen, success wasn't measured in column inches or spreadsheets. The moment that defined it all didn't happen in a boardroom or a 5-star review. It happened on a quiet morning, just before opening hours. Jalen was standing at his usual post, clipboard in hand, finalizing the night's prep list. His chef's coat was crisp, the words, "Kitchen Operations Lead, Jalen Martinez," embroidered proudly across his chest. He was checking sauce temperatures when the back kitchen door creaked open. Marcus stepped through, his first day on the job. He stood there, backpack still slung over one shoulder, trying to hide his nerves behind a hopeful smile. Jalen looked at his brother, not as a boy who needed saving, but as a young man stepping into a future that just a few months ago seemed impossible. Jalen's voice was calm and confident as he handed him an apron. "Are you ready?" Marcus nodded. And in that moment, Jalen understood something profound. He wasn't just a dishwasher anymore. He wasn't just an employee. He was the foundation of something worth building. Something worth passing on. Not just a restaurant, but a home.